U.S. military forces in Iraq, Syria, and the Persian Gulf have all been targeted by drone and missile strikes. Is this an escalation of the Hamas-Israel conflict? Who is behind it? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. This is a breaking news update on the Israel-Hamas conflict. Let's get into it. Okay, first, you've got a U.S. military base in southern Syria was hit by drones fairly recently. These were the non-demonetized word is one-way drones, but they are armed explosive drones meant to fly low and under the radar. If you've been following the Ukraine conflict, you know these type of drones are pretty iconic and are very effective at thwarting air defense systems. But in this case, this drone was interdicted by the air defense systems at the base. This is a base with around 900 U.S. troops who are primarily assisting Syrian Democratic Forces in combating the Islamic State. But Syria, as you guys probably know, is a hotbed of just about every faction and interest within the Middle East, operate within Syria and have their own sort of puppet militias that are funded or backed by them, including the United States, right? As we just said, Syrian Democratic Forces, generally U.S. aligned. You have Russian forces that back Assad. You have Hezbollah that broadly backs Assad, but just kind of Hezbollah honestly backs Hezbollah. So there's certainly a lot of opportunity for Iran or Iranian interests to strike U.S. forces. But this is definitely an escalation. This is very rare to see these type of drone attacks against U.S. forces. And even more complicated, in Iraq, 2 U.S. military bases have come under fire in the last 72 hours. One in and around Erbil. This is in Iraqi Kurdistan, right? The Kurds, extremely favorable to the United States and generally a very safe region. But the other base was the Al-Assad Air Base in a much more contested region of Iraq in the Al-Anbar province. Both of these drones, in fact, all 3 of the drones here, none actually made it to their target. They were all intercepted by U.S. air defenses, but in some cases still exploded just away from the base, causing minor injuries and damaging some equipment, which means the drone was likely very, very close to its target before it was detected. If you've been on a U.S. base in places like Iraq, you know that the air defenses like to have a huge amount of standoff within the perimeter, right? Giving the air defenses the maximum time to do these intercepts. But there weren't one-way drones in operation when during the global war on terror when I was deployed. So your fears were things like mortars and rocket attacks, and that's what U.S. air defense systems are primarily focused on. There's also some reports that that another oil facility where U.S. troops are occasionally stationed was also attacked by drones within Syria, but that hasn't really been confirmed. A group calling itself Tashkil al-Wartharin, or the Inheritor, claimed responsibility for the attack. But as you guys know, I think this is probably like where Russia will sort of invent hacker groups to claim responsibility for a hack when really it was the Russian government. I think this is something similar. This seems like a group that probably got conjured up out of thin air. It could have been Iranian forces directly, or it could have been an Iranian-backed militia. It could also simply be a function of the fact that when you have so much rhetoric by all parties against the West, against Israelis, against, all countries sort of in that Western alignment, that you're going to have some number of militia that do their own thing. And this is the thing to remember, the way these sort of murky militia type groups operate is that they don't have tight command and controls. It's not like their leadership is going to call up Tehran and go, we want authorization to throw a drone at the U.S. forces. They're going to just watch TV, get things on their phone, get each other worked up, and then they're going to say, let's launch a drone attack against the United States. So I wouldn't sit there and believe that this is the Ayatollah in Tehran, like twirling his beard saying, we'll show those Americans. It could just be a bunch of doofuses with weapons trying to who are just fired up from the rhetoric against the West. But what I don't think this is the case for sure is near Yemen. A U.S. Navy warship actually at least activated its air defense systems in response to rockets that had been fired from Yemen. And while they were sort of headed towards the ship, they were really seemed to be on a course for Israel. And this is a U.S. Navy guided missile destroyer, the USS Carney, which was operating in the northern Red Sea. It intercepted the projectiles and there were no injuries. According to a Pentagon statement, they said, quote, "We cannot say for certain what these missiles and drones were targeting, but they were launched from Yemen, headed along the North Sea, potentially towards targets in Israel." Now, here's the thing to remember that I think is really important here is that if we go to our friend Google Maps, you can see that here's the Red Sea and here's Yemen, and you can see Israel is quite a hike. So these are not, this would not be a drone or rocket system that's from amateur hour, right? This is a long hike, and likely it was passing through the Red Sea because it wouldn't require entering Saudi airspace or Egyptian airspace. Though I imagine the Red Sea airspace is probably kind of sort of controlled, but it wouldn't necessarily trigger the same alarms as drones or rockets entering, passing over Riyadh, for example. So again, you've got these rebels launching strikes that appear to be something on the order of 1,000 miles. Guys, for a rocket to pass 1,000 miles of distance, it needs to be very high end. To be able to hit a target requires a guidance system at that point or extremely precise manufacturing, allowing for it to transit that far and still hit the target. Even if your target's the size of a country, right? You see literally that how precise it has to be to cover that 1,000 miles and still hit its intended target, even the right country. So I say that because it means to me that they are not, one, you can't DIY a rocket that stretches 1,000 miles. It's just not within the purview of, Yemeni rebels. And so it's likely provided by a state actor. We know that these Houthi rebels that control these Yemen are backed by Iran. So it seems highly likely that these are Iranian-backed missiles and drones. Again, likely targeting Israel. But this is how sort of Iran fights its proxy wars. And it is troubling that now the U.S. has had to intervene militarily to protect Israel, but it did so probably in the interest, whether they realize it or not, in Iran's interest, right? Iran itself, unlikely to want to actually see this conflict escalate, right? If Iran wanted to play, it would be easier to fire these missile systems from Iran itself into Israel directly. But it didn't want to do that. It wanted to maintain plausible deniability. So it went with this extremely inconvenient launch point in Yemen, and they made their Houthi rebel proxies launch the actual strikes, even though clearly Iran had to have provided these weapons. Again, a drone that can transit 1,000 miles, guys, that's not something you can buy at Radio Shack. And I suspect that Iran may also have known that the U.S. had guided missile destroyers in the Red Sea that were monitoring it. So it may have literally just been to send a message done with the intention of U.S. Air defenses intercepting it. It's tough to say. Iran does a lot of these strange signaling games, and this is definitely a signaling function, but it remains to be seen if what the real message is here. Again, this could have been a dangerous escalation, and it seems like it was almost so inept that it almost is intentional. Some form of playing to your base without actually escalating the conflict. Anyway, that is all I have right now for you guys. Hit subscribe, hit like if you enjoy this somewhat less biased, less partisan content, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.